You've come a long way, Mr. World Traveler.
Yeah.
Since the last time you've been here, it's a bit of an evolution. And so have you. You've traveled the world. Where have you taken Lykoi Productions?
We've had a couple good opportunities so far. Germany, Dusseldorf specifically, which I really wouldn't have expected. Where else? London, New York a couple times, Raleigh, a couple places domestically. We just got back from Chicago this last week, and then I've had just with the video stuff, like even when I was overseas with my now fiance, we got a couple opportunities out there to film. Like I filmed this like cool hotel bakery for this like really good pastry chef out there on the coast of like Montenegro. So basically the last like couple years, anywhere I go, I'll bring the camera with me. And then luckily on the business side of things, I've had a couple opportunities to go film places too. But yeah, Germany, London, and a couple places domestically, and then hopefully some more to come later.
What's awesome about that, and why I like kind of just picking at it at first, is it's a very inspiring story, because we get lost in the heights of celebrities and wealth, that we forget how attainable the American dream is. And with consistency and just like determination, you can quit that 9-to-5 that you hate and find yourself in your dream gig that's taking you to all the corners of the world that you've always wished.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to say it. I appreciate the way, like, we've been friends for many years, and you've got to experience, like, kind of my approach. We've known each other through school and all these different things, and I can't say I really hated the 9-to-5. I just knew that there's different ways to kind of reach where you want to be, and I realized, like, the 9-to-5 stuff I knew I can do, and I don't want to call it 9-to-5. I was in like supply chain specifically, and I went to business school specifically to be able to run a business and know about business. And there's just a point where I realized I can continue working for somebody, and I had an MBA, which is like, if you by English, administrative degree, and I could keep doing that and work my way up. And the other side is, greatest part about being in America and some of the opportunities, if you do have a passion, you can take that and make something of it. But, with anything, you got to have a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit mixed in with that. But it's kind of, I brought this analogy just because it's a good way to look at it. In any video game, right, you might have, like, let's just say I played it not too long ago, like Red Dead Redemption, right? And in the game, you're like a Western cowboy, and you have the opportunity to do different kinds of roles. You can be a moonshiner, you can be a hunter, whatever it is. In order to take that role, you have to invest in it, meaning you have to buy a certain piece of equipment in order to take on those jobs. The camera stuff was that same thing for me. So I had to invest in the equipment, invest in the business, and then through that, gain the experience. And that applies to everything. So it's most people think, oh, it's choosing a job. It's like, no, you have to invest in it. You have to have ownership in it, and you have to milk it from there. So, yeah, I mean, you can plug and play with anything in that same sense, right?
It's true. It's true. And I think whether it's a physical accomplishment, right? Like there's the Olympics just passed this past summer, and following some of the athletes, the grit and determination for the physical accomplishments, or even just getting into an art academy that you've wanted to achieve for so long. As someone that never really was in a path of the arts or creativity, but more of a philosophical endeavor, and really, I mean, podcasting spoke to it so perfectly, because it was like, I'm not a artistic person, but I have a lot to say, and there's a lot of thoughts I'd like to break down. And no matter how it finds itself in your life, I mean, it's amazing how many people have taken on this endeavor. They have the spark, and they have something to offer the world, but it is a hard balance. I mean, you have to balance your life. You just said you were fortunate to take on a proposal, and now you're looking at marriage with your fiance. You're building a life at home. We talked about when you buy a house, how much of a job that becomes. And then, again, career-wise, keeping friends, physically staying fit and on top of it, there's a lot to juggle. And it's so easy to get lost in the... If you define your product, like Kanye, if Kanye is this perfect gem, if Kanye measured the value of Kanye upon the first iterations of audiences and bosses and producers judging him, then he would never have reached the heights of Kanye, right? I mean, there's that story of him for the first time ever making his debut on the Chappelle Show, and this was like some kid they were taking a chance on. But prior to that, I'm sure there were plenty of times where, you know, I'll post a clip and it gets nowhere near the views or likes I thought it would have. And if you begin to judge yourself on the initial, like you said, I had to build it myself. I had to buy the material, the equipment, and then teach myself. And, you know, fortunately, it's not an audience of 1 million. It's an audience of like 5 when you're trying to work out the muscles of putting on a great, you know, some good content.
100%.
But if you don't work through that, you may have been the Kanye and you just will never get off the ground. And I think the sentiment, it's project, you know, you listen to Joe Rogan all the time and it's like, think about how many people that you listen to only the successful stories, and I kept my head down and I kept going. And think about how many people did that and never made it, and you never hear their story. And it's like, there's probably tons of them. Maybe, but you know what I've learned through my pursuit? Not many people are willing to eat the shit long enough to truly get to the end. Like, I'm going to go Shawshank on you. If freedom is at the end of the shit tunnel, there's a long mile of shit you got to eat before you're in the land of the free. 100%. And so I disagree with Joe, because this was a pretty guy that got to blow up on a sitcom at 19. Dude, you found Wonka's golden ticket. That's not the life. And so I want to talk to Tim Dillon, somebody that was raised as like a crackhead and broke out of this perpetual system to make a name for himself. Now he's got a Netflix show. That's pretty awesome. This is an internet guy. Look at Andrew Schultz, an internet guy. I think the person that breaks that ceiling and does it in an independent way, because that's new. That's new right now. People don't believe it's possible that you could do it in an independent way. I think the person that does that is the one that keeps their head down and drags through the shit the longest.
Couldn't agree with you more. There's another thing when it comes to this stuff where, let's just use the scenario of, let's just say you were laid off and you had a job opportunity you need filled, or you need a job and we're talking and you're telling me, hey, man, I'm unemployed here. I could tell you, let's just say for the cameras, hey, if you buy this camera and you work at it, there's opportunity. But then you're going to ask the question, when is that opportunity? How much is that opportunity? And you realize that motivating factor for doing that thing is to get paid at the end of the day. Most people don't have those like series of questions when they're kind of taking something on, like what's fueling you to do it. There's constantly those stories where people are like an inch away from striking gold and they pull off, right? And at the end of the day, it has to be like an intrinsic value for doing it. But also, even on the Joe example, there's that quote, and I might have said it on one of the podcasts we said before. Mike Tyson says you got to be the champ to be the champ. So it means you have to follow the role that title carries even before you get the title. So by that principle, it's only a matter of time. You were like, by doing the action, the opportunity will find you. And that's the reality of it. People talk about like a simulation idea to things, where I think it's not necessarily a single person's viewpoint, because you would have to be a one-dimensional, like a single God in this universe. Everybody's going across the same thing and we're intertwining with it. The people, for example, you could be, let's just say high school football. You are a stud in Alaska, 6'5", something like Josh Allen. Or take Josh Allen's story. That dude didn't get a single offer, ended up at Wyoming, ends up being a first-round draft pick. We can say, okay, the right opportunities. Man, people see him, the work ethic, the potential, and they want to be part of that ride.
Right.
You have to be that person to people build around you. You're doing the podcast. You've had opportunities where people are like, he does the work. Let me saddle on top of this. You could have sold yourself in a figurative way, and you've had those opportunities. Why? Because if you build it, they will come. There's no such thing as building it for them. It's for you, and once it's there in that structure of your whatever you're doing, that opportunity will happen. There's a tennis statistic on this exact thing. What's the difference between the top 5 tennis players, top 25? Literally, when a point goes wrong, the top 5 have this attitude, watch this. They believe you'd think, why would you think you're going to get the next one over me? But in their head, they're convinced the next one's theirs. The rest of us are like, maybe it's mine. No, man, there is a will, and maybe your percentage isn't going to be 100%. But if you could live in that little tunnel vision that you have, and you're telling yourself that you got it, your chances at whatever it is are better. It's like saying you're lucky raises your your chances of being lucky. It's that same principle. So when it comes to opportunity, it doesn't even matter what you're doing. It's like if you're thick-headed enough, it's gonna come. And what's fueling you long enough to do it? I mean, stick around. Genius could be figured out after your life too. Doesn't mean you made money doing it. You could have reached that pinnacle, not been recognized, but still hit a 1%, you know?
I love that point because it kind of, and we'll probably touch upon it throughout the show today, so we'll leave it for then. But there's probably a metaphysical element to this too, where, you know, Oprah sells her vision board to the public and people kind of chuckle and brush it off. But as you say, there's also something in the fabric of this reality that our mind and our will can mold and guide. And so with that strength in will and determination, and truthfully, you can't just have determination for an hour. It's living it and it being a part of your cloak that you wear every day, that, again, maybe that vision board, whatever you want to put on that, it probably can be grabbed. But again, crawl through that tunnel.
Yeah.
But you ready to start this episode? Because let's get this thing going.
Let's do it.
So I love that term, think tank. Think tank. You know what a think tank is? Like, how's a think tank go, James?
Yeah, you know they got cancel culture nowadays. You gotta watch what you say. It's getting real scary out here.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know if I can take the conversation here, but we might as well. It's the Rethink Tank. Looks like you had a little bit too much to think here in the Rethink Tank.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? And thanks for joining us again. As you could tell, we are going to be dissecting accountability and strength today. I think we've had a strong launch pad into the discussion. But without further ado, let me introduce my guest and someone I'm very excited to talk to today, my good friend, Nenad Camur from Lykoi Productions, in the heights of growing and achieving dreams, right? How you doing, man?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on.
I could be more excited. And there's something super special to today's episode. Notice I'm really the only one in today's theme, and I didn't tell Nenad because he wouldn't have been excited about it anyway. But this is the Halloween episode.
Nice.
And if you recall, the last time we had Halloween decor, and we talked about Halloween, birthdays, and the occult that surrounds us and is just suffocating our society. And instead of berating the point and continuously walking down a dumb road, because we know the world we're in. And if you want to go down the fun metaphysical world that we played in on that episode, go check it out. But I thought, what would be without a giant cross? I couldn't find a giant cross. I would have put that in the. What's the opposite of Halloween? That should be the total theme of this Halloween episode. If I couldn't find, an Abu Ghraib size cross that we could put in the middle of here, like I would wish. So, I think the best way to be the antithesis to a Halloween episode would be promoting accountability and strength. So, as I had suggested, a thought-provoking philosophical question that we will be exploring this episode will examine accountability and strength. That question will be, is true strength defined by one's ability to hold themselves accountable, or is accountability an outcome of strength? This question will open the discussion on the nature of personal and moral strength, the role of self-discipline and responsibility, and how accountability shapes or is shaped by one's character. We hope to also explore the relationship between societal expectations of strength, physical, emotional, or moral, and individual accountability. So with that springboarding us into that, I think we really need to know the first part being the nature of personal and moral strength. If we want to question true strength and accountability, what is strength? What is strength on a personal sense, a societal sense, philosophical sense? What is strength?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can describe it as a characteristic to start. It might be, I guess, if I look at this question, I think strength is a result of the actions. It's something that's developed. I don't think it's intrinsic. You could say it is intrinsic in the sense that we all have an unbelievable ability to be strong. It's just a matter of if we've been conditioned in the environments to be able to expose that or use it as a tool for ourselves, right? So, if you're asking, is true strength defined by one's ability to hold themselves accountable, or is accountability an outcome of strength? Accountability I would call an action, right? So to be an accountable person for yourself, that's holding yourself to a standard. And I don't think yesterday or tomorrow can be counted. It's just today. So yeah, I think it is, accountability is the action, strength is the result. And I would say true strength is, the result of one's ability to hold themselves accountable consistently, right? And how strong you are could apply to that, but it also, you have to include, what about people who aren't in action but endure, So,
that's what I was going to say. How about, I want to push back just a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I do believe the inverse, that accountability, I like your definition of accountability. I'm going to adopt that. That being holding yourself to a standard. I think, however, though, a standard is developed through being someone that possesses the trait of strength, right? Strength being consistent, strength being accountable, strength being probably a culmination of attributes, accountability being a piece of that. And so you're a strong man. You've got a family that fights in the MMA. This is the genes of the Camurs, and you've always been a strong guy. But also, there's a 7-year-old that's in the Ronald McDonald House in Cleveland right now that's fighting a fight that is beyond lifting weights, right? 100%. So they've got a tumor at the age of seven, and society would not hesitate to proclaim them with the trait of strength, having persevered through the different therapies and treatments required to persevere and survive something like that. So strength, while having tethered to a physical element, and as a society, we can't ignore that. Like we can't be calling people that just want to cut their appendages off because they think they're something else. We can't just call them strong too. You're not the 7-year-old with a tumor, and you're not LeBron James, right? Like you're not checking any of the boxes at which we would define as strength. So I like that piece, but then I circle back to, I think, one of the considerations that is the foundation of the question, which is the nature of personal strength or moral strength. So moral strength is a really hard one, dude. Have you at all considered or seen the movie The Platform?
It's fun. Literally in the last week, I watched both of them.
Boom. Love that.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So The Platform 2 just came out.
Yeah.
I loved, so one.
I didn't watch to the end of Platform 2.
Whatever. You don't need it because
but-
it's goofy. It gets goofy, but this is a movie where for the first time in a long time, I had to go to the internet and go, explain to me the ending because it kind of was goofy. And of course, all the explanations on the internet gave it its own little twist on it. So, but take the goofy end out of it. Last 10 minutes moot. I love the first time somebody was explaining this to me. He's like, but it's kind of a bad movie. And I'm like, you don't want to see this movie. It's a crappy movie. And he goes through and explains the whole thing. I'm like, dude, that sounds like an awesome movie.
Yeah.
As somebody who has a philosophy degree, that sounds exactly what I want to dive into. And he's like, well, yeah, I guess now saying it like that, it was kind of, it's like, yeah, you're an idiot. So I go and watch it. Loved it. Then they're like, they're doing this thing again. Cool. How are you going to do that in any different way? I absolutely loved how they created a whole nother theoretical story that makes you question human nature, right? Like, how many days would you starve yourself for the pursuit of the people, utilitarianism, everybody thriving? And you watch people get pushed to their brink. I bring this story up because there is a balance to this question. And, okay, so the question was the nature of personal and moral strength. We'll get to personal strength. But I like your point of accountability, holding yourself to a standard. Having moral strength, that's creating a moral compass, a standard, and then holding yourself to that standard even when it's difficult, not fun, hard. You see in that story multiple instances where it's hard to make the moral decision. And not to go totally biblical in the conversation, but there's instances where you're like, yeah, but I'd eat a chunk of a thigh to survive. And it's like, but the message of Christ, goodness, and just pursuit of having a moral compass, even in the instant, goodness would tell you you're better off dying than choosing or succumbing or becoming complacent to evil, darkness, or wrongness. So moral strength is, regardless of your physical state, when posed with that difficult decision that confronts or conflicts your moral compass, and it'd be easier to succumb, ignore, allow. That is the exact moment where that moral strength is showcased or buried.
Sure, yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't think enough people, because this is a dog eat dog world, man, and you either get trampled on or be trampled, or you trample or be trampled. It's like, that's a mentality that is proudly bred in America. I'd be a defender of capitalism, but this would be a symptom of that. And so in a world where most people wouldn't have that moral strength, it makes it even harder to display it yourself personally. I don't know. What are your thoughts on moral strength, what it is, and how you could stay true to it?
Yeah, I mean, part of it's going to be affected by the culture you're in, right? So, like, if you talk about moral, like, what morality do you have in certain situations? Or, for example, like, I guess if you're an indigenous tribe, and it's just an example where when somebody passes, cannibalism or something might be blessing or be a way to honor that person. Who knows? And then there's those stories like the rugby team or soccer team in the Andes that crashed, and they had to basically decide how they'd survive, and they had to basically resort to that. But I guess when you're talking about moral moral strength. I think it's just having a set of principles, a right or wrong. I think we have a conscience in us ingrained of like what we feel is right or wrong. And some people, due to unforeseen circumstances, might have that conditioned out of them. But most of us have a good awareness of when we're hurting something or doing something in a negative sense. And then where you walk the fine line, and I think like even religion, people can misjudge it, is like, let's talk vegetarianism in Christianity. And I don't want to butcher the quote, but something along the lines, blessed is the man, blessed is the animal that's eaten by the blessed man. So like if you live a good life, if you are walking the way, the animal that you ate or passed, it's blessed because it's nourishing the good in you, right? And in that situation where you're talking about, I guess if you just for mental exercise, if that piece of meat that you eat would result in the energy to save X amount of people, that's where you have the moral discussion is, what do you feel like is God's will or a will in that sense? And usually like people can either have it ingrained in principle there, or they could look for it exterior. But regardless, part of it is just differentiating what being nice is and being good. Those are two very different things. You know, being a nice person, you can be taken advantage of. Being a good person, you can be considered harsh, but you're doing things for the right reason and for the overall good, right? So, yeah, I think bottom line, you have to define good as also being tough, and the good thing to do sometimes is the tough thing. And then when you can make that decision and trust it, that means your moral compass is there. And I guess you can say like what's guiding you is right. And you always have to ask yourself why, you know, because if you're just reacting out of rage or whatever the given scenario, then you're not being moral. You're not asking yourself why. So it's at what point are you the animal and what point are you the human kind of line. Right. And I do think nature and nurture have to be brought up because I think more of it is nurture than it is nature. Some people might be born to be good. Some people need it to be developed. But if you're in a home or in an area that it's developed in you, it's the nurture will bring out more out of people. And there's even a documentary about 3 twins who through a adoption clinic, they were separated on purpose for a social experiment. And they ended up finding each other, and they all lived different lives. They all had mental disabilities. The one with the loving home, the one that would experience it back, best mental situation, most strength, and held the others together. And I don't want to ruin the rest of the story, but those examples, I think people, when we're in school, we're taught, oh, it's a 50-50, or spend your life figuring it out. I think we have to give more credit to the nurture side of things, and then that ultimately is what guides people's morality. You know what I'm saying?
So in the consideration of nature versus nurture, nurture being the environment around you that impacts your characteristics, your personality. I had author, journalist James Renner on. We debated the philosophy of crime. And I posed it to him and got an interesting answer. And I'm still, with my personal journey, not satisfied. I need to find, I'm trying to desperately find an answer to the question of, we understand that nature, your genetic upbringing, your genetic code, versus the environment you're raised in, both have a balancing impact on who you are and your character. And we also know that your environment, as it has a significant impact.
Yeah.
Right? So, that all being said, at what point, so take the example of somebody who did have the strong genetic code, but a terrible environment, hostile domestic home, whatever the case may be, abusive lifestyle. They then develop these antisocial characteristics, right? Disruptive, angry, maybe abusive, physically harmful. It's difficult to be around this person. It's difficult to make them assimilate. It's difficult for them to hold down a job. It's difficult for them to be a functioning member of society simply as a result of the terrible environment they were raised in. Okay. At 10 years old, that isn't your fault. At 15 years old, it still isn't your fault. At 25, though, you're becoming your own man, and you really should be taking accountability for this. At some point, yes, you couldn't control your dad that abused you, but at 35, okay, you're supposed to be autonomous. You should have been removed from this for a decade and a half, if not two. What is going on here? Now, 45, 55, 65, your dad's long gone, and you're still a menace to society. So the question begs, at what you could have been severely negatively impacted by your environment, but at what point are you supposed to transcend that? And we can then hold accountable to, yes, you had a tough road, but you still didn't hold up your end of the bargain and transcend all of the terrible characteristics. Or do we just acknowledge that was inevitably what you were going to be, and we just got to figure out how to live with you? Because the sad part is that abusive father that turned you into what you are, you're probably going to go create another one because you're going to be your dad, and the cycle continues itself. So I am desperately trying to figure out the answer to, at what point can I start holding you accountable? Is it 30? It's 18. Society says you're on your own at 18. But 18, we know your brain isn't fully developed and you're still a kid. So at what point do I get to go, you're a fully fledged adult, and all of those skeletons that your dad has shoved in your closet, or your mom, or your teacher, or your coach, or your grandpa, it's no longer an excuse, and we get to hold you accountable.
Yeah, I mean, there's different, like there's societies where they immediately have a structure for people when they turn 18, where they could, for example, go to an apartment. A lot of the Nordic countries, they do like a very independent structure for people. But I think in the case that you're talking about, like the way we look at people, like the standard you hold somebody, they'll live up to it. So if you think less of somebody, they'll meet exactly what you're asking of them. If, for example, you're constantly expecting your friend to be less than their best, then they're just going to fill whatever standard you're holding to them. In my personal faith, you're born to be perfect, right? And the best version. And where you can exercise this kind of like action would be, let's say you picked up the hobby of drawing today. Okay, and I see you drawing, and immediately I have to have a set of different definitions on what I subscribe with talent-wise and what I subscribe with work-wise. So I can sit there and see you drawing, and the thought exercise you can do is, what's the 1% of drawing? What's the 1% person of that draws? And when somebody starts something, you can be like, okay, do I love them enough to see them as the best version of what they're doing? And we don't look at each other enough like that, right? When I see somebody who's constantly, for example, expecting less of me than I expect of myself, that's not my circle, man. And fair. I see how my father or my mother looks at me, or you might not even have somebody like that. It's how you look at yourself. And it's the very best version of it. And that's whatever bar you set. If you miss that bar, that's a much better place to be than setting it lower and being at a far lower level than where you could be. So I think the way we look at, for example, whether it be kids, students, or anything, immediately at a young age, we're trying to put them in certain categories. But right off the bat, you can categorize all kids as the potential to be president or whatever it is. Now, what's going to differentiate them is their ability to have the same renewed emotion on that subject matter every day. If that kid doesn't like math every day, or we can't assume it's dumb, maybe that's just not his interest enough to learn to be good at math. And that, okay, like there is set of standards, and you could say some things come easier to others, but the point is, like, if somebody starts something, you hold them to the 1%, you hold them to the best, not because you have to be there, but it's the effort and the practice of trying to be perfect, not actually being perfect. It's the attempt. You can find yourself in flow and and joy with. And you see this in culture through the test of time. Samurais, Bushido. That's every single thing you do, whether it's folding your clothes, pouring yourself a drink, making a coffee, can be a hyper level of detail. We just choose not to practice that, and it doesn't translate to other things. So, I mean, kind of going on a tangent, going back to how we look at kids and when they can be indoctrinated and when they can't be, I think it's whenever they're ready, okay? And we create systems where you allow those people who are ready earlier, and you create a system where those who need more time can take the time. Like, why can't we live with our parents longer? Other cultures let you milk it, make money as a family, help the parents, help yourself. But here we're like, yo, you're a bum if you're living with your parents. Those are these situations where we can leverage individually, but we're immediately going, hey, you gotta be on your own. If somebody's ready to be on their own and is an entrepreneur at 18, let's set it up for him to do that. Doesn't mean that the other one with a different timeline is it. The bottom line is, as long as you're creating opportunities, and we're in a country where you name it, you can do it.
Right.
You know? And
so at what point, okay, somebody would say, look at me, you stayed at home too long. And I get to go, look at the house I get to walk into because I stayed at home and took advantage of the resources available to me. And that's between me and my family.
Yeah,
that's none of your business.
100%.
So somebody will look at me and go, that's your privilege. That's your advantage. And on balance with the person whose dad beat them until they were 18 and then said, at 18, get the f*** out of here, kicks them out. And then, they really didn't get a leg up. They had to work at the furniture store, and they really weren't able to get far out of that. Now that's kind of the realm they live in. Because of what they live, they have resentment, they have negative characteristics, they become this, leech on society or burden on society, whatever the case may be. At what point do I get to look at that person and go, yes, you're on the different timeline, but we also live in the world of opportunity. And like you said, all the opportunity to do whatever you want is around you. But also, they didn't have the finances. They didn't develop their brain in such a way to have the open heart, the drive or discipline to take on the role to get there. At what point do I get to look at you and go, you're a bum. You're a failure.
You did it right here. So you explained, hey, I empathize with you. I'm with you. Let's look at it from a mathematical scenario. Here's your situation. First time. You do it again a second time. Then, if you're a true friend, you go, cut it. Cut it. I've saw like the...
And what is that? What is that point? Is it 25? 30, you're pretty old, man.
It's the second you recognize that they're in that cycle for self-deprecation and to because some people you'll notice will argue because they're bored. When you realize that person's in the scenario, not because bad luck, it's because they enjoy being this underdog or because if they reach their potential, well, what challenges they're after? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So they use that excuse, like I gotta keep myself active in that sense. So I think the second the problem's acknowledged, accountability should follow directly thereafter. So and in society we should have.
But here's another thing.
Yeah.
Now you've got some kid in the roots of Cleveland that he never reaches that epiphany, right? Like morally, we could sit here all day being Socrates, being like Kant or John Locke. We could say the second your brain makes that acknowledgement, the day you see it, the day you see out the allegory of the cave, the day you see outside of the cave is the day you're held accountable. But then I think that also gives the pass to the 50, 60-year-old schmuck that never sees it. Like here, I want to give you an example. A reason why I'm never gonna support universal basic income. Analogy I've used in the past, especially recently. You've got somebody at the law table in front of the judge that's 50 years old and doesn't have a job and is a leech on society. Absolute waste organic material. And is a male, so I hold him to a higher standard because you're supposed to be the provider, and look at you. You're just a bum. And, you know, we have a heart. We actually care about your life more than you do. And so we're sitting here giving hope and resources available to get you out of that rut. When the judge looks at you and says, hey, you know, did you consider getting a job? Did you look at possibly McDonald's? And he scoffs at it. McDonald's. It's like, you know what, sir? I resonate with scoffing at McDonald's at 55 years old. But here's also the reality, sir, is a society, as I got the liberal with me that was podcasting with me to agree, but then he reneges on this because he doesn't see, Democrats don't see the logical complications or contradictions they hold. So when I point out to him, you agree that a society needs jobs that 16-year-olds can hold down. Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, then that means it's not a living wage. It's a 16-year-old's job to get extra cash, to get gas, to whatever, to hold that. But it's not a living wage because you're 16, you're in school, whatever. So the sad part is, sir, you gave up the 16-year-old's job at 16, at 26, at 36, at 46, and now at 56 when we're looking at you and saying, go get that job. You're too good for it. You're too old for it. You're beyond that. And it's like, yeah, because you've foregone your responsibility for far too long. Yeah. So to me, there's going to be that role where that 55-year-old's looking at a judge and he don't see it. So at what point do I get to still morally, you should have seen it. You should have seen it at 30. You should have seen it at 35.
Right now, I think most people are playing with the fact that there's the laws of man and there's the laws of nature in this case. Like, I was watching a National Geographic episode with my significant other, and we're sitting there, and it was my brother and his wife as well there, and they didn't want to watch the scene, and we changed it, but I was like, hey, this is just a great example. Later on in a different conversation, do you remember that episode I was talking to my fiance about this deer about to be eaten by wolves, and she didn't want to watch it? I go, the reality of like finances in real life is you're either the deer or the wolf. You know, there is no option. Your kids, when you raise them, they're either sheep or wolves. And you can try and create like, I guess, like a list of scenarios where you're playing by different rules and circumstances. But the end of the day is nobody's going to come save you when the nature of things kick in, right? Look at student loans right now. People are sitting there for a while accounting for the potential of student loan forgiveness, and the laws of nature are applying. Power is being shifted. They can't make that decision for other people. So you're asking for your government to give you some financial freedom on a decision you made and you signed up for, and it's not coming in time. So that's the nature of it. So are you going to sit there and wait, potentially put yourself in financial crisis? Or are you going to look at it as I'm the deer getting chewed on and actually make an escape? And I think the more critical you look at that, whether it's you're raising kids or you're choosing a major you're going in, we're not watching the Disney Channel. A bear's not going to hug you in the woods. Like, you have to look at things for the severity of what they are. Not holding yourself accountable when life's beating you down will put you in a ditch, man. And if you don't have people to remind you of that, you can only hope that the mirror can reflect it and you can see it in time. You know what I'm saying? So I think the exercise in terms of the questions, right, but your tone behind it is like the right tone. I think there is a level of urgency that people got to carry, and it's too, people want to dance around the subject, but it is really cold-hearted, and you're gonna get your ass bit if you don't tighten up on some things, right?
Yeah, I like the point you draw from that example you provided. Something that it also triggered. So the scene of the deer, is that from a documentary? Is it from a movie?
Yeah, it's like they're in the like
a movie.
It's a
theatrical.
No, it's a documentary. National Geographic. They're just
okay. So it's like
really happening.
Just nature. Okay. Yeah. I think. Okay, that changes kind of the point, but not too much. Because I was going to say, if it was a theatrical, cinematic, or something, most of the time those scenes are in there because why do you watch these things? Because they make you feel.
Yeah.
And so you're not always going to like the feelings that they provoke, but art is there to make you feel. It being a documentary, okay, well, it's exploiting that same vein. Okay, you come to entertainment to feel. The thing that we're making you feel is cherry picking emotional realities of nature.
Yeah.
And it may trigger an emotion, but it's also the reality that we live. So here's the difficult balance. I think we as a society are so desperate. We've gotten so comfortable that now we put more effort into preserving that comfort and that safe space more than reflecting and growing in the space we're in. Like, changing the channel from the deer being attacked didn't change that deer's circumstances.
No.
And it didn't change the world, the floating rock you share with all of the other tragedy and goodness that surrounds you. And so if we try to create lenses that, okay, 3D, right? If you can only see blue and you continue to cut out the red everywhere in your life, everywhere you see red, everything that makes you feel, anything that doesn't make you feel in a way that you like or feels like blue, and you just completely cut out the red LEDs altogether, then you've lost the entire dimension to this world. And I say that because, it gets thrown in my face or in philosophical dialogues all the time. It gets thrown in a religious person's face all the time. How could there be a God if there's 3-year-olds that have cancer, or there's a 4-year-old that got hit by a bus today, or whatever? And I look at God in a different way in some respects, and I look at it as rightness, goodness, and love, okay? So in a world, if we made a perfect echo chamber, a perfect vacuum, where all you have is goodness and love, you would actually lose the ability to gauge and see or know or measure what is goodness, what is love, because they're in a yin and a yang.
It has to be in context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is no love, there is no goodness without the balance of evil, darkness, or pain or harm. And so if you continue to create a world that only sees through the blue lens, you are living in a two-dimensional world that pigeonholes you to the full landscape of this reality.
Sure.
So I only bring this comment up because I've, through my experience in the last decade, especially with different girlfriends and whatnot, you see this is the trend. The trend is and it's creating their safe spaces. I don't think this accomplishes, and this is where strength comes back in, right? Like, you're actually weakening yourself if you don't have environments that you need to have strength to push through.
Yeah, you got to look at things objectively in the reality of it and give yourself circumstances to look back. There's a good point to what you're saying is the world has everything. And even when there's an example, when you buy a certain car model, you see more of it. There's a video I saw, this guy sitting there and he asked it was a podcast. He asked the guy he's sitting with to close his eyes, and then when he opens his eyes, pick out different colors. Like he'll say the green color. And we can kind of talk through what would happen. So you've got a couple different green buttons here. You've got green on your shirt. You've got this. You start picking out everything, right? Close your eyes and you say the same thing for red. Got those drapes you would categorize, right? As red. You don't see it, but there's a little bit of red there. The collar on that monkey, if you're looking for red and I want more red, I would label that as red, right?
Sure.
And you'll create a variation of the spectrum. You're willing to bring in more oranges to add more reds.
Right.
That's that thing with the good in the world and the successes you want. You got to open up the definition of your color for what you're looking for, because then you're going to pick out way more. Like when people are like, oh, I have to define my success as this end route.
Right.
What about all those variations of the color leading up to that hardcore solid red? You know what I'm saying? So that once I heard that, I'm like, damn. Like,
well, you've triggered a thought, and not to get lost to the metaphor, but if the metaphor is like 3D glasses, you see through the blue lens, which is all the good, and then you see through the red, which is all the bad. And really, the strongest perspective is being able to comfortably and adequately see through both. If that's the goal, if you get lost in the practice of trying to flush out and block out all the red, so all you see is blue, then what you're going to do is continue to widen the scope and definition of blue to make more things fit in that world, because not everything fits in that world. That's the yin and the yang to this existence. But you're going to find those on the fringe, the light greens and the lighter purples, or whatever the case may be. Those that bleed will fit this lens, and we just slowly further tighten what it means to be red. And that's where, taking the metaphor to its fullest sense, if goodness, you'll sit there and convince yourself that putting puberty inhibitors on a child, somehow that green bullshit fits in the blue lens simply because you're just trying to cut out red. And if I could cut out all the red and then fit it in the blue, and now your moral compass, what is right, is skewed. You've widened it to such a degree that what was good, what the definition of good, it's totally new. And it's lost its definition because it's including and allowing things that never should find itself in that realm.
You're right. Now, just to play with it, what do you need in order to see a color?
Light.
So regardless, you got to have an illuminating factor to it. And all colors exist in themselves. It's what's absorbed and reflected, right?
Right.
So technically the red can exist in blue, the blue in the red, right?
To the next level.
Right? But like if we're playing like that, but that
You're
is,
right.
yeah.
You're right. Look at what the lens that Hitler looked through was a totally different color than the rest of the world.
Right.
Right? Because here's another interesting element.
Rose color, like the analogy rose-colored glasses or whatever it is.
Right,
Yeah,
yes.
100%.
Because we live in a world where less than 1% of human beings, the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, very, very few actually choose darkness, evil, pain for the sakeness of evil.
Yeah.
For the sake of evil. Most people, like Hitler, the 99.99999% of people, pick it throughout history, the Mongols, they all believed what they were doing was good. They found a way to justify it. They were looking through the blue, even though truly it was red. Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting point, is that it is a very personal, and that's why strength of a moral compass is so important.
Huge.
And you also have to be willing to challenge that, because the moral compass you and I may have held 20 years ago is so very different than the moral compass today. And to let that guide you in a healthy manner, you need to let it evolve in the everlasting pursuit towards rightness or goodness.
What you're talking about, I got chills, because this is what it means to live a saintly life. To never know and constant question if you're a good person. Like they did a interview with Padre Pio, and they asked him like, do you know who you are? And he's like, more than ever, I don't know who I am. And that's the most like saintly thing to say. Somebody who you could say is like, well, you're a priest, you're a ambassador of Christ, you're all these things. He so far down, he doesn't know if you'll ever know his true identity. It's for you to kind of like, and then you could look at it religiously or whatever it is. But the point is, like, if you're constantly questioning yourself, am I a good person? Am I doing the good thing? That's a very, like, I don't call it, you can't dub yourself a saint, but that's a saintly way to live, where you're constantly scrutinizing yourself in the exterior world, and you're asking, is this the right? Is this the right? And the way you're inspecting it is what's kind of lacking. So the fact that like this podcast is there to provoke something that we all intrinsically have, and we just have to remind ourselves that like the next step can be thoughtful instead of just mundane, right? But you're dead on in terms of like the question itself. I don't know if you can get an answer if you're a good person or not, because you have to ask who's judging, or how it affects or what the long-term result is. And you can kind of take that thought exercise to whatever degree. But from a bottom line, if you're asking yourself the question between right and wrong, and is this a changing like definition based off circumstance, you're kind of in a good place in terms of like the philosophy of how to take the next action, right? Whereas most people just trust themselves so much that the gifts they receive from life, they don't question where it's coming from, because you can get it from the bad too. Like you can be blessed. Like imagine, man, I just know your podcast, and like people probably don't know the opportunities you could have taken and been somewhere faster, but you held to yourself.
And the Diddy route is so much faster.
Yeah,
and get flown out to Los Angeles, and let me tell you,
yeah,
the Diddy route is so much quicker. but come back to Ohio.
You read it. You're like, where's this blessing coming from? Is this from like a good place?
No.
Yeah.
It is what do they call themselves? The City of Angels, because wolves love hiding in sheep's clothing. Let me tell you.
But that exact thing where like you're gonna have opportunities and things that come your way that like you might win the lottery tomorrow. You can be like, wow, what a blessing, and then lose yourself with the money. So is it a curse? Is it a blessing? Where is it coming from? How am I judging it? I think and you don't know unless you have that kind of compass that's saying, hey, let me take a step back and look at it from an objective point of view, right?
No, I love that. So I got to ask you, then what is the role of self-discipline and responsibility in strength and accountability? So looking at self-discipline and responsibility.
I mean, I think it's a necessary evil. Like if you want to, there's a price to everything. If you want to feel better, to have better peace of mind, you have to give in to something, right? And the layers that you can do it, you can do, let's say, working out for your own health. Now, you can do it a step further. If you're a father, you're working out to be healthy, to stay around your kids longer. It's what's that motivating factor, but it's a necessary thing to be part of the journey, and it can't be result driven. It's just got to be in order to be in the car, or be on the ride, you gotta make sure you're in the car, and you gotta make sure things are on, and that's where accountability is. It's the checklist on yourself that keeps the vehicle moving, right? Without that, like you can't really take that next step to move to that next point, right? Otherwise, you're like a bag in the wind, you know. Wherever you end up, you take that role, right?
No, I love that. It does come down to the balance of self-discipline and responsibility. And in the consideration of self-discipline, we've touched upon it. We're on totally different pursuits, but in a creative space that kind of run parallel with each other. And we're also Cleveland nobodies that are trying to make themselves known in a world that's just so big. We're 1 in 7.5 billion. And through the exercise of trying to compete in that realm, we've been able to work a lot with each other. We've been able to talk a lot of our issues out and grow in this space together. And one piece that has become a strong banner to the pursuit I'm on. Mm-hmm. I continue to tell myself, because I could easily get lost in the analytics. The statistics could cripple you and you'd want to quit tomorrow.
Yeah.
But the number itself doesn't matter when I take a look like this and it's like, whoa, this is so much farther than it was last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So you looked at me and you said, compounding interest. Don't get lost in the weeds. Compounding interest. Are you just a little bit farther than you were yesterday?
1% daily.
That 1% daily. Then you will look back and you've traveled miles. And so that's always my goal is don't get lost in the analytics. Only look at yesterday. Am I just a little bit farther than I was yesterday? Then you know what? I can't beat myself up. And so if the consideration is self-discipline, it's wiping out all the noise, wiping out all the distractions, wiping out everything that convinces you otherwise. Find the thing that you're passionate about, your calling, and that's so much easier said than done. And honestly, that pursuit, that question, could be a podcast in and of itself, but my advice to you would be, if you're sitting here going, well, I don't know my passion, I don't know my pursuit, the best thing would be is be active, get the hell out there, and start experiencing. Experience. Life is about experience. And what you're going to learn before your passion, the thing that is your driver, you're going to find out 10 times over the thing you don't like, the thing that's not your passion, the thing that you are not meant to be in. 100%. And that's what's going to slowly hone you into your craft and where you're supposed to be. And so I do feel I was very lucky in finding one of those passions at a very young age. So I knew what I was going into in college. I knew where that was going to project me into grad school and how I was going to carry that. I was lucky. But also, don't get lost in the corporate mechanism that's like, hey, are you confused? You know what you want to be? Gender studies are for you. It's like, then when you make a dumb decision out of ignorance and you're like, wow, I'm in debt for a job that isn't going to pay for my career, learn from that mistake. Adapt and move on. Don't sit here and go, well, now I need universal basic income because I'm stuck in a rut and I can't pay for food. It's like, no, either if the going gets tough, get the hell going, or as our high school biology teacher would say, or fall by the wayside and just disappear. Because those are your two options. You and I have had conversations about health and fitness, and we've constantly agreed that there is no stagnant. There's no like, I'm fat, and then I'm going to get there, I'm fit. And then you're just there. It's like, no. You're there for a day. And you either continue that, or you're either continuing in fitness or you're falling behind. And the perfect health space is probably getting to healthy and then finding a balance where you just stay in that intermediary where you have your cheat days, you have your good days, and it balances itself out and you kind of live in this realm. But nothing is stagnant, and you have to continue sharpening those blades. So, self-discipline. It's going to get tough. It's not going to be easy, and sometimes it's going to feel like you're just mindlessly roaming in a room with no light, and you're just feeling around. But the self-discipline aspect and your responsibility is to not see when the government dangles a free paycheck, well, you know what? It is easier to just play video games all day. You don't get to fall into that complacency. You have to rise above it. When you are crippled in such, you know what I've seen? I've seen a guy who is a vegetable, totally paralyzed, and yet he's got some of the biggest following on Twitch playing video games with his tongue. There's a guy beating you with his tongue.
That's crazy.
When we talk about strength, I'm not sitting here saying become the Rock, because there's a vegetable beating you today.
Yeah, willpower, pure willpower.
Boom. So there's where I think it's an intrinsic piece to this conversation. The self-discipline is where you find that compounding interest. It is recreating this on a daily basis. You don't get to just do this for a couple weeks and then just go, well, I did the thing, and then fall back into complacency. It's making it a fabric of who you are.
100%. 100%.
Before I pose any other further questions, did you want to expound on that at all?
I mean, I think like part of that is like what you're talking about is what persona you're adopting. Right. And what's amazing about nowadays, man, like I think 300 years ago, you probably didn't have many, you couldn't be a videographer, a podcaster, an artist. You could be a farmer, a husband, or any role within the family. So we're in this age where some of the natural roles that we take on, we think we have to stack on them, and then on top of that, like our society is very much one where if you don't adopt a persona, it'll be given to you. And then also that relationship with it. You aren't, like, for example, you aren't your career. You are that individual in it. For example, I mean, a lot of questions you ask, like, what do you do? What are you? You know, and it's one of my least favorite things because it's like it kind of thimbles and tightens up your realm of potential as a person. So it's like, I mean, I carry a lot of different roles, you know, and any new role that life requires of me, I'll adopt it if that's in the best interest of myself and my community. And when you don't hold on to the persona of a role, you also create communities and work environments where it can be open to good change, right? You can use examples of, like, let's say somebody who is a direct artist. They might have to feel like they have to dress a certain way or be adopted as a certain type of, like, ambiguous, mysterious person, you know, and they could be the opposite. Somebody like yourself may not be willing to adopt the role of a creative or artist because you think you have to be blacked out or have nail polish on or whatever it is. So society naturally creates these, like, figurines or mannequins of roles, and we're sitting here trying to adopt them, but you don't have to be any of it. You know, you kind of can define it however you want, and then you're a pretty malleable person in general. So, bottom line, if you don't define who you are, it will be defined for you. And if you're sitting there, like, in high school right now, like they say that popular kids don't end up, like, in very successful positions, or if you are, you got to kind of wake up to the world being very big and you having to make a name for yourself. Some of them find them in a scenario where they have no persona outside of life. They adopt whatever job they have and what's the most interesting thing about them, you know? And it's not that they aren't interesting people. Everybody's very interesting. It's they didn't put themselves in the environment to portray that or show that. And the worst possible thing is, let's say you believe in an afterlife, finding out you could have been more, and sitting there being like, okay, this is it. It's like, brother, if there is, let's just say you don't believe, but if there is, and you get to see a little screen that who you could have been, don't break your own heart. You know what I'm saying? Don't sit there and look at everything you could have been for yourself and everybody around you. You know what I'm saying? And it is really servicing others. Once you start really digging at this subject matter, you could be like, oh, self-discipline. Okay, you're shredded, you're loaded, you got everything, but you're alone. Why does the self-discipline matter? It's when you can be so good at taking care of yourself, you can take care of others. And then you're really something else. You're larger than life, and you could have a legacy, and you can, you could have a right to kind of extend your arm a little more for a legacy, right?
I love that point.
Yeah, it doesn't come naturally in these conversations. We kind of uncover it. Like in my own life, I'm constantly seeking this. Part of these dialogues are for us to kind of find that out for ourselves, and then maybe tomorrow try and implement it, because it's kind of like great movies, 50 First Dates and Groundhog's Day. These same storyline, every day you have to wake up and remind yourself of who you are. And like the previous night, you could have bad sleep. You could have been really good yesterday. If you thought you were, let's say the day before you were shit, that motivated you to have a great day. The day after you wake up, your motivation was because you were shit. Now you're good. You're just going to be ebbing and flow, right? So somewhere in there, what's going to be the dog every single day? I don't care who I was yesterday. I don't care who I'm going to be tomorrow. It's gnawing at yourself just to get to that next level. And some of us, I don't think I've been blessed with that in totality. I've had glimpses of it. And I think everybody has moments. And that's where we're kind of touched and flow, right?
Wow. And I like that point because it exemplifies why, having a whole conversation about strength, it exemplifies why something like strength is worth having such a long conversation about, and why it's such a strong trait that people should strive for. It's because it's not that easy to obtain.
No.
Right? Like you could be on the ever-longing pursuit for it, and those that are striving for it are the closest to strength. But those that truly achieve it, I mean, that's a rarity beyond itself, and that's not able to be measured until we can look at
Far
the
past your life.
culmination of your entire
Yeah.
existence, right? Like after that third person preview after you leave this realm, then we could truly know. There's never a point where you achieve it and you finally get to go, I'm strong, and it's over.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, does accountability shape character, or is accountability shaped by one's character? So is it that accountability is what shapes our character, or is it that our character is what shapes accountability?
It's definitely the latter. I think that accountability shapes the character, because the lack of it, you're going to have a different character. It's like water carving out a river, right? It's abrasive. It's taking out the stone, and it creates that path, and it's going to be constant. So that accountability will create that flow and that merge of things, where the lack of it, it's destitute, right? There's nothing there. So yeah, when somebody doesn't have accountability, there is such thing as not having character, being soulless, constantly around us, man.
NPCs.
Yeah, I mean, all the time, man. And it's like when you say he doesn't have good character, or he doesn't have character, I think it's completely possible, and it's the lack of experience and the lack of opportunities. It's not saying that person's not able to have character, but they just weren't exposed to enough to create it, right? So, yeah, like the water didn't meet the rock, man. You're just this stone with no experience, right? You got to touch the water a little bit, you know?
Right. And there's varying degrees of character, right? So you could have character, and if your character is lacking accountability, you could be tolerable, you could be successful, but you're not the highest version of yourself without tapping into something like
you said it. And the fact that you said it that way, you can actually have character without the accountability, because it's just character untested, right?
Ooh,
like,
I like that.
I guess you can say. So if let's say you, it's hard to say if somebody was born with it, but let's just say you have it intrinsically, and you just never had the opportunity to show it. And like you could say, it's like if somebody has heart in them, bottom line, right? You can't really measure that. It's this kind of unspoken thing that resonates with everybody. It's like, I do think that exists, man. I think that exists without the experience. So I could say character exists without accountability. Accountability would be more of a test to see what kind of character you have. Now that we're talking through it, if you were to ask me, hey, how would you define it? I would say accountability would be a good way to measure what kind of character you have.
I like that.
Yeah. I mean, thanks to you for kind of putting it the way you just did. I wouldn't have looked at it that way originally, but
that's a cool point to draw upon.
But do you think your own personal character, you would have it regardless of like other people holding you accountable for it? Like, let's say this podcast, and I know you personally, but this podcast, would you be doing it without other people holding you to it? Or if nobody watched, or if your friends weren't asking you, hey, where's the podcast? Would you still do it?
Well, hey, for better or for worse, living in a world where this isn't reaching the audience size you would want it to be, it's so easy to get, like, I've lived in a world where Theo Vaughn misses a podcast and there's 50,000 tweets that day, and he has to go to his Instagram story and go, there's going to be no podcast today, it's coming out next week, something came up, sorry. Mm-hmm. It's like, when I miss a podcast, nobody notices. Or when they notice, I don't hear them because the voice ain't that loud for it to have an impact. And it's so easy to just be like, listen, this has been a long road, but we're only at the beginning of it, right?
Yeah.
Like 10 years, and then I could finally evaluate if I should give this thing up or not, which I won't. But I'm only halfway there. So this is kind of moot because it's still the juvenile stage. But like a few years ago, I'm convincing myself, all right, I need to be consistent. this is coming out once a week, no matter what. And I didn't have the process as streamlined. Like, it took me 4 times as long. The equipment and processes I was using was a lot more rudimentary. I mean, those are things that I had to siphon out. And there were periods where it's like, I worked every hour and it still wasn't coming out on Friday. And it was like, all right, who cares? Like,
Yeah.
It's 3 a.m. and it's like, I'm going to bed. Nobody's tweeting at me. Nobody's going to notice. And if you allow yourself to succumb to that too much, then you're just, this is just as much as playing basketball in your front yard in your driveway. Like, this is just a hobby. Like, if you want this to become your lifestyle that takes over your occupation that you feel you're stuck with, then this isn't just a playtime hobby. You jump in every once in a while and you pop out.
You're saying it's intrinsic to you, though.
It had to be. It had to be. And part of the experience was asking yourself, is this it? Is this the thing you're going to commit it all to? Are you willing, and is this the thing that you're going to give everything to? Because there was also a question, I remember this was maybe 2 years ago. I'm driving home from work, and again, I'm in that routine where I'm giving my profession 8 hours a day, and then this dream that I want to totally absorb my profession and become my sole profession. Well, that means I got to give another 8 hours outside of that 8 hours. Now I'm giving 16 hours a day, one to put food on my table and hopefully be able to afford a mortgage in the future, and the other is a dream. Now I'm working 2 professions nonstop, and it's exhausting. And you ask yourself, is this worth it? Or how far do I beat myself crawling through the tube of shit before I go, you know what? You gave it a try, time to move on. And I thought about the people that would go, see, I told you I wasn't going to do it. It was never, because yes, trust me, there's definitely things that I post that I'm well aware make me look silly or is silly or, 1960s, my dad would go, that's pretty gay. And you know what? I still do it because I'm in the love of this pursuit. But I don't do it to feed that person that goes, I told you, that was look how silly you made yourself look for no reason. We always knew you weren't going to make it. I told myself at that point where I had this confrontation, the realization and the takeaway was, if I die at 75 with an audience of 50 and I never stopped, then you never got to say I didn't do it.
That's the best. The odds are against the critic always. Always, because time is on your side. You put a deadline.
I'm here until I'm not.
But just on that same concept, because I don't have a podcast. I've been around podcasts. I've done pop-up podcasts for people, like corporate-wise, and then obviously this is the most experience I've had sitting in and seeing the background of somebody build it. I do know there's 2 lanes, just like this is no different than the music industry. You could be funded or non-funded. You can be an independent artist versus non-independent. What I don't think people understand is you have an intrinsic trust that there is a place for somebody who's independent like you.
Man, we hope.
That's like, because otherwise there'd be, if there was no place, that's actually like, we live in communism at that point. Right. So we know and we can trust that there is a place for those independent. What percentage do you think of, like, I have a guess at this, but if you were to say, like, whether it's the music industry or podcast industry, and you could even say NFL players, if you were to throw in an example that are Masons or non-Masons or whatever, use that examples. What percentage would you think of podcasts exist like you, and versus the reality of what they are, like the Theo Vaughns, who are comedians who had a podcast set up and was funded?
It's an interesting question because, one, like being a comedian, being a musician, being an actor, there's a place for you to go try to make it, right? So even if you're an independent musician, you can go to Nashville, you can go to Atlanta, like depending on your genre. If you're an actor or if you're a thespian, you go to New York. If you're an actor, you go to LA. If you're an athlete, you try to find yourself in the college or farm system. So the interesting thing to this new, totally, this landscape that was created out of nothing is totally a whole new frontier. And there isn't the place to go to develop the podcasting. And I opened an episode up, like I had brought up recently, the episode debating the philosophy of crime, having discussed with somebody who is an independent in the podcast space. It is exactly like all of those artistic pursuits. It is very much monopolized right now. Mm-hmm. And you either sign yourself to a conglomerate or you're lost in the abyss. And money kind of forecasts all of that. So if you're in the conglomerate that has all the deep pockets, who also has the deep pockets to siphon the benefit out of Google, YouTube, iTunes, all of it, then how do you compete? You're lost in the abyss. I think the person that defeats that, right? Like Oliver Anthony, who's saying Rich Men North of Richmond. That guy had his banger that caught the world. Yeah. But that wasn't the first song he wrote. And he was strumming his banjo to swamp concerts of 15 people, building his Tinder until finally the spark hits and it all goes up in flame.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're in a space, like there is a meme joke of what it is to be in podcasting, which is, everybody's got a podcast. What's yours about?
Yeah, yeah.
And if that's the world you're competing in, then yeah, you're lost at sea. You're 1 in a billion, just totally drowned. But that's a narrative created by the audience, by the outsider looking in, that sees millions and millions of podcast options and not the person living it. And what I can tell you is I have firsthand experience. The vast majority of the independent podcaster is giving up by year 3, 4, 5. And I'm being hella generous. They are quitting by episode 10. And I'm talking the Theo Vaughns of the, like, you're seeing big bad comedians, actors. I mean, I can't think of the guy from, there's just actors that they didn't even stick with it because they thought they'd walk into Joe Rogan money and they don't have nearly the audience they thought they did. And so I don't want to circle back to something we've already worked out, but when you ask me to evaluate the landscape, I think the landscape is infinite. Like, any person can grab a microphone and have access to the internet. So the number is infinite. What's in front of our face and what we see seems large, but it's a corporate conglomerate. I mean, look at the Call Her Daddy podcast. You have corporations playing tug of war over, like, the one gem. And that's because we believe there's infinite gems.
Yeah.
But the truth is there's probably 10.
Yeah.
Like, look at the numbers of top 10 podcasts.
You're hitting
the fact that Tucker and Joe Rogan and Call Her Daddy, their numbers, the three of them can continuously flirt with each other. I'm number one. I'm number one. I'm number one. And it fluctuates so much. It tells you, one, the audience population is very polarized. It's very, like, it's not spread. Like, you could go just find your niche, make Birdhouse podcasts. No. Like, no, it is very polarized. The person that you think would be interested in Birdhouse podcasts and the person that would be totally turned off from that, more of them than that, they all choose Joe Rogan over your Birdhouse podcast. So this delusion of, like, you could blow yourself up on YouTube, just find your little niche. No, you need to compete with the big boys because I think that's what we see. That's the conglomerate. The rest is infinity. And the little independent ones that exist in this realm, they overwhelm the population of what we know and the people in front of our face. However, their longevity is moot. It's gone. They're nothing. They'll be a flash in the pan. And I do believe the very, very few that have the self-discipline and the accountability to see it through will inevitably find themselves on the end of because you never have to sell yourself out to a production company that'll broadcast you to a larger audience.
You're hitting my thought process on this. So, like, I guess the question I would ask you here, is there a historical figure that you think can compete with Joe Rogan, all those other top 3 podcasts, wipe out all their accolades, any past life they had, they're born today? Do you believe there's figures in the past that have existed that could be that top 1%?
Here's the weird thing. Like, someone that comes to mind is like Jordan Peterson, right? Here is an academic. Here's a brilliant man that never really probably saw himself in this world and now is a prominent figure in it. I think there are people that can, like, if they're born today, they can break through that ceiling.
Like,
the quickest way would be selling yourself off.
Yeah.
But I do believe, but here's the balance to that. What makes Jordan Peterson great isn't the podcasting. It's that this man has created his whole life outside of it.
So
Go ahead.
You're talking that 1 percentile, right?
Sure, yeah.
Let's keep the exercise on 1 percentile. Let's say Teddy Roosevelt is not president, none of the accolades he had, just that character of that fighting spirit boxer. Let's say you pick him up as a teenager. That character that made him president, you put him today, do you think he would be somebody who could resonate with the masses on the level of a Joe Rogan? Basically, another example, it would be like Bruce Lee. This is an example I think applies perfectly. Bruce Lee, I believe, no matter the time, because of how good he was in his skill set of martial arts, would have reached the upper pinnacle. The problem is there wasn't the best he could do in show business. Today, he could be the greatest fighter at exponential level, right? Like a Hulk Hogan. Would Hulk Hogan have been just a character that walks into a room 100 years ago? I think people are born with a level of flair intrinsic to them that you put them in anywhere in any place, whether they bring together a room of 50 people or they bring together 100, it's going to be in context, but they are a spark, right?
Right.
So when we're talking about podcasting, I look at you as that kind of individual. I see you as a diamond in the rough in terms of your communication skills. I'd have a hard time finding somebody in the podcast space that can play devil's advocate, but also basically make a guest out of anybody who shows up, right? So then you would ask, like, okay, could you see this guy, you, on Top 1% podcast? Could I see you having interesting dialogue with a Rogan? Yes. So then are you just a diamond in the rough? And I believe that's what the bottom line is. I believe people exist in all their ability, regardless of the environment, and whether we're lucky enough to see them shine, that's the blessing of life, or the tragedy that we'll know them as a hidden genius that died and we realize how great they were after the fact, right? So I asked you those questions because I think we're on the same side. I think greatness will be uncovered no matter what. Right. And there's appetites, and I wrote this down, an appetite for ambition. You are a person who didn't do a podcast about like woodworking or making like a bird nest because you wanted to be the best at something, right? Not everybody's born like that. You know what I'm saying?
So let me ask you something else. There is a social position that's developed in our TikTok Gen Z world that I have a knee-jerk reaction to. My gut turns over this position of NPCs, right? So we are creating this social narrative that, like, a large portion of the people are just lemmings, zombies, non-player characters that I have an issue with this developing cognitive perspective because it diminishes human lives that they're fucking real. Like, this is a real fucking person. And I hate that we have a whole generation of people that are like, yeah, you could go to the grocery store and chuck a gallon of milk at their head because they're just a stupid NPC. And if I can passionately explain that position, it's also a contradiction to something that I also kind of hold pretty true, which is resonating with your point, which is that there are people that are special. I think Andrew Tate was going to kick the world's ass regardless of where he was at. That's the nature of Andrew Tate. That's who he was. But at the same time, then, that means people were born NPCs, or people were naturally, their nature, going to be that way. This comes back to the original conversation we were playing with earlier, too. You could have that Andrew Tate that is unfortunately dealt the wrong deck and has an abusive domestic life that beats that golden spark out of them before it can even shine. So there's plenty of people that probably had that and their environment disabled it in whatever way that may be. But on the flip side, I think I have a hard time totally selling myself to that point, because then that also has to concede or acknowledge that there are lives that aren't the diamond and you're just the dirt around us.
You're right on. I believe we're all diamonds.
Bingo.
Okay. All diamonds. The only thing is it uncovered or circumstances? Like, let's say this. I think you and I would be terrible therapists in this environment right now. We'll talk more than listen to somebody, right? Because if somebody's whining,
we'll be truth that you wouldn't want to hear.
Yeah, we'll be like, oh, dude, you got to wake up. Like, there's a point where in certain environments we're not the best in that environment. For example, I look at, like, I've been your friend since 4th grade, man. So we played football together. You've always had a good ability to create community around yourself. I remember doing airsoft at your house, all kinds of stuff, right? And you've had people like poker nights, whatever it is. So there's people, and I believe you have parents who were like, enabled that,
totally,
right?
That's what yes.
And are like, challenge the world. And then there's the ones that didn't get that opportunity, who we don't know. And there's also timid souls. Like, there's a joke where I heard like a old guy go, it was in a movie or something. They're like, your mom probably picked you up out of the crib. Meaning you didn't climb out of your crib. You didn't defy the odds. You want your kid to be, if I caught my kid sneaking out of the crib, I'd be mad, but I'm also like a little excited.
Oh, yeah. Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Listen, I don't think you've ever heard this story, but you had to have. When we were in 2nd grade, I discovered my grandfather, who I never met, his World War II cards that had naked girls on them. And I went to school in 2nd grade, and I looked at Steve and a bunch of our friends, and I was like, hey, Steve's birthday is this weekend, and we're all going to his sleepover party. I just found the greatest thing ever. In 2nd grade, this was the Holy Grail. In a world where there was no internet, what the hell did I just find? And the guys at the counter, at the cafeteria table were like, oh, you got to bring it. Oh, I'm bringing it. And it became this tragedy to some of the parents. Like, oh, my God, this is the worst thing to ever happen. But out of all the okay, so the day comes where the next morning, because 2 of the kids, I look forward to telling you who they were. They went upstairs and told the mom, our friend's mom. So-and-so, Alexander has this in the basement. And the 2 parents came downstairs. I heard you have some cards. And me and my friend whose house we were at were like, our stomach, how the hell do they know? What the? And they're like, can we have the cards? I go, I threw them away. I don't know. I'm in 2nd grade. I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, well, they couldn't have gone too far, so you need to go find them and give them to me. So me and my friend go into the back room. We look at each other. I'm like, how do they know? What the hell? We didn't know 2 of the guys sold us out. So I go, give them back to them. The next morning when the parents came to pick all the kids up, you would have thought I killed their firstborn.
Oh, my God.
Everybody was just like, dun, 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 dun. Except for Mr. He comes up to me, he goes, nice job, kid. Way to go. And it comes back to your point where it's like, my dad beat my ass. Belt came out. I had to write a letter to every household.
Wow.
Apologizing.
Wow.
Dude, when my dad beat my ass, he cried. Because it was one of those, like, I have to do this. It was severe.
Yeah.
But I have to do this. And bringing it full circle, I do know, with the perspective of time and experience, deep down, my dad was like, that was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad you did that.
Yeah.
Or not that I'm glad you did it, but it shows a character trait that I'm glad I didn't beat out of you.
Yeah.
Or break.
Yeah.
Or you're willing to challenge the world. You're also a man. I don't have to worry about you having a rainbow cup in the future.
Yeah.
But, like, it was something that was big, but really, in the grand scheme of things, was far from severe.
100%.
So I like your point that you brought up, where it's like you have this position in you of challenging the world, and that was promoted in you by your parents. And it was funny. Last night I was with them, and I show them how Disney has created the first transgender stormtrooper.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, look, it's got the rainbow. Like,
I didn't know
they're all supposed to be white stormtroopers.
I didn't know they were gendered before,
and here we are.
Yeah,
and
welcome.
so it's got the pink and blue stripes down it and everything. And, they had their comments. And I look at my mom. My mom made a comment. I go, and you're expecting me to sit complacent and not say anything. I'm supposed to just let this all happen. And you could see the reflection of, like, what did we create? But then also a pride and, like, thankful, like you could tell how it encouraged them. It's discouraging to take on a machine you're not going to win.
Yeah.
There's a whole system and mechanism in place. You are so small, you're an ant. They'll walk over you. But at the same time, I'm glad you're so convicted in your moral compass and strength that we must have done something right for you to be blinded in this moral virtue.
Yeah, it's a special thing when you realize your kid's not a sheep that you have to guard all the time. And you have really two choices growing up. And I have a sister that's 11 years younger than me. And I had a brother my whole life, year and 5 months apart. The relationship with a sister is a little different than a brother. But
Definitely.
It does come down to a bottom line in terms of how they conduct themselves and how they do certain things. But it's a standard that you hold other people to, but also I think, like, just generally we got to have grace when we're kind of going through where a kid should be and where a kid shouldn't be. My sister gave me an example, like, kind of like where you could take pride. So my sisters got from my brother and I this really competitive chippiness. Like, we're ultra competitive to the point where I've had my fiance go, like, I don't want to do this with you. You're too competitive. Like, we could be drawing something. And I just, like, whatever it is, I nothing personal. It's like, if we're talking about a thing, I want to look at it in its best format. Right. The second I start looking at things like, okay, I'm going to try half-ass here, but then my system's all messed up. My dials are off. All I know is 100% or no percent. So she was telling me a story about how she's having a hard time with making friends with some of the girls on the team. And she was like, specifically, she was like upset about that day she was in a tennis match in doubles. And the girl that she was playing with apparently was talking bad about her to other teammates, saying that my sister was intimidating her. And basically what happened during the match, the girl couldn't get the serve over. She played really bad. My sister just has like a competitive face. Dude. And I told her some of it, like, hey, I asked her, like, well, were you picking her up? And she's like, yeah, I wasn't trying to be rude, but her presence of trying to win, this girl uses an excuse for her bad play. Boom. And I said, Sophia, you have two opportunities here. You know, you have two situations you can go. You can either be apologetic for other people's interpretations, or you could be the best version of yourselves. And as a result, your teammates will also bring themselves up. And there's a point where everybody has to kind of, like, let's say this personal journey. Let's say even you with this podcast. There's a point where you do this thing so great, the people you know might lose time with you. And the person they knew might not be the same guy. And you have to give up who you were for who you're going to become. And is the cost worth it? Am I around the right circle? That's what you have to establish. But to be that person, you have to accept that some things you have to give up. So if you're silly and you bring everybody to ease, well, that might be that cost of you never having enough ambition to do something. Or you could be that person that's intense, finds balance in the intensity, and raises everybody else up. And, you know, there's that Michael Jordan conversation. Most of them will be like, well, was he a good teammate? Was he a good person? It's like, well, he brought the best out of me. If you're talking about winning, why are we asking all these little feeling things?
Dude, that comes back to, did you see on the internet with Baker and Tom Brady?
Yeah.
So Baker had that interview where he's like, man, I came into this culture where everybody was like uptight, you know, it was very militant. Everybody, you know, stand up straight, and, you know, it's just a totally different environment now. It's a lot more laid back, and here's the thing. We're all very different, and we're all different seeds, and so we can all be successful and grow in different soils and different environments. So I acknowledge that some people probably do thrive in, you know, a more comfortable environment than one that's so strictly militant. But at the same time, you've never seen those comfortable environments reach the heights of the Chicago Bulls to the early Patriots, right? Like, you say whatever you want, and that's why it was funny during the Tampa Bay game that Baker is throwing in. Tom Brady is the announcer on the game, and he acknowledges without, you know, flat out saying, he goes, you know, people criticize me for the environment that I created within the franchise, and the reality is that's the environment that was necessary, not just to win, but to be a dynasty. I wanted to dominate.
I couldn't agree with you.
Guess what? Being comfortable, Baker, you might reach a Super Bowl once. That wasn't Tom Brady's goal. He wanted to wear the Super Bowl crown more than anyone else.
Yep. And perfect example off of that, like, I'm in business with my family, my brother. And most people will say, like, you have to acknowledge going into business with your family, you have to leave feelings at the door. And him and I had a conversation early. Business is business. Friendship's friendship. When it comes to edits, when it comes to the work we put out, there's a bottom line on a standard. And a football team is a family as well, but there's a point where you have to acknowledge the standard, and this comes back to accountability. What is the standard? Are we working towards it? And it's trusting that everybody's chasing dopamine. And if you've ever blown out your lungs, the dopamine and the sustained dopamine from putting in a day's work versus avoiding it is 10x. And anybody who's put in a day's work knows that that's better. You can get a trickle, a feeder of some dopamine sitting on your ass, watching whatever, texting whoever, scrolling whatever. It will never match the flood you get and the sustainable feeling you have when you have evidence to your character. And the only time it's done is when you have to self-sacrifice versus self-deprecate in terms of the opportunity. And, you know, that's the trade-off. It's like, are you going to hang around enough to feel bad, feeling good, or are you going to sacrifice in order to call yourself a champion in the way you conduct yourself, you know? And so true. Yeah, I mean, I get fired up talking about it. We can go from I can talk, like, you and I are similar. We can be talking about something fun-loving, but the second you start talking about standards of work and what you accept and don't, you have to be very defensive, defensive. Because if you start talking to people who have a standard below excellence, you will become complacent yourself. And complacency is when you get sick of winning.
Yes.
As far as I can never get sick of winning. I could only forget about the feeling winning brings enough to become complacent. But if you find that win today, you can never forget how good winning feels. You know what I'm saying? And there's points where we could be like, oh, it's not about winning or losing. Everything's about winning. It's just what can you find wins in the action? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Not the results. It's all about that, you know?
So accountability is not making those concessions.
Yes.
And the result of that would be strength.
Yes.
So one last aspect to this inquiry, I think, before we can answer the theme question, and that is, what is the relationship between societal expectations of strength, physical, emotional, or moral, and individual accountability? So taking on that relationship and balance between the two of them directly.
That's a good question. You have to subscribe to society's expectations, right? So if you were in the woods and you had no idea what expectations are made for you, you'd only be left with yours, right? So we're in a situation where we're forced to take on both, and it's like kind of like that. If a tree falls in the woods and you didn't hear it, did it actually happen, right? So like I guess in what veil of existence do you live in, and how much do you care about other people's opinions, or how much you were conditioned to care about them? You know what I'm saying?
Let me help guide that a little bit further, because I like the way you interpreted the question. But flushing it out further, if you are the guy lost in the woods, right?
Okay.
And you don't have the society around you to help you define what those societal expectations of strength are.
Yeah, because
now you're a society of one, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't diminish the fact that there isn't an expectation of strength. It's just that expectation of strength is different because you're by yourself, alone, in the woods. So you still have to be strong, keeping out the bears, providing food. You got a dog. In my theory, you got a dog. Feed the dog. Like, you got to have some responsibility beyond just responsibility to yourself, especially if we're going to call it, in the theory, a society. So what is the relationship between that expectation of strength, whether you're in a cabin or you're in a high rise in Chicago? There's a social or societal expectation of strength, whatever that may be, physical, emotional, or moral. And what is its relationship then with the individual accountability? Let me flesh it out further before you answer it then. If I were to address this, considering the man in the cabin, what's the balance between his individual accountability and that relationship with his little mini society's expectation of strength? Well, in a world where it's just you and the pup, my dog's Misdemeanor. That's her name. So if it's just you and Missy and you're kicking it in a cabin in the woods, like, what are your social expectations of strength? I have to provide me and Missy a shelter. I have to keep out the predators, and I have to provide us nutrients to keep on going into the next day. Those are my expectations of strength. And that strength will be challenged when resources become scarce, when predators approach us and we're forced to throw ourselves into a situation of defense or flight. That all being balanced then with its relationship to accountability. So what is my accountability? Accountability not just to myself, but to Misdemeanor. Like, I owe it to my dog. Or is it in a larger society, maybe the relationship is different. Maybe your individual accountability has accumulated more responsibility, more duties, but that doesn't eliminate the fact that that relationship, that balance, does exist. So if I'm in a high rise, in a society like Chicago, where it has the highest gun violence in our country, okay, well then what is my relationship to the individual accountability? Well, if and when you're walking past an alleyway, because you're not going to save the world. You're not Superman. You're not going to change all the sins and issues of Chicago overnight. But the individual accountability is where that strength can be measured. This is a theme you've highlighted. And so I would suggest when you're walking down the alleyway and down the alley, you're not going to stop all the hood rats with all the dangerous guns. But when you see the little old lady being held up for her purse, you're forced into a moment of accountability. And there is a great chance that inserting yourself does not result in your prosperity, right? In this specific example. But the theme of this entire inquiry has been sometimes you're going to have to make the right decision even if it leads to your demise. And I only say that maybe in the fantastical belief, but still coming from the belief that this isn't the end of my show and that it goes on to another realm.
Yeah.
And so I am willing to fall on the sword for the sake of goodness, coming back to the platform too, right? I am willing to take a position or an action that may result in my demise insofar as it is in the preservance of goodness, rightness, love. And so, I mean, but then somebody's going to look at you and be like, no, you're just being stupid. Like, you could have left that situation, that lady loses her purse, and you're still alive. You inserted yourself to enforce some vigilante Batman justice, and now you're dead. I don't feel bad for it. That would definitely be my dad's position. I don't feel bad for you.
Yeah.
So what is that relationship between accountability and societal strength? And is there, but we've also brought up a lot of times in this conversation that even any little bit of concession makes it all for naught.
Yeah. I mean, I guess following with what you said, do you think who is holier, I guess in this example, a monk being a good monk in a monastery or a good man in society, right? So,
dude, I've thought of this. I was literally investigating this personally today. Because it's one of those, once you've reached the point of enlightenment, you kind of go, yeah, I guess I'm never going to change the world, but the best thing I can do, okay, the goal is to get as many people to the point of enlightenment as possible.
Yeah.
I've reached enlightenment. It's kind of like Squid Games, the point where the doll turns around and shoots people, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of when you finally get to the finish line, it really doesn't matter what you do there. You could throw down your lawn chair and just kick it. I made it.
Yeah.
So I've crossed the line of enlightenment. So I sat there and was asking myself, okay, so the monk did all the work, got all the way down there, crossed the finish line, and now is at the point of enlightenment. The monk has chosen what is the best thing for me, for the world, for morality, goodness, strength, all of this. The best thing is for me to just be. I just be. Okay, well, if the goal is to get as many people to that point as possible, but we're learning that the masses, whether it's because of the environment and opposing factors against them, we're learning the majority of people are not going to reach that naturally. So it's kind of like, another example, the lifeboat on the Titanic. The monk made it to the lifeboat. That monk decided, I made it there, and the best thing for me, there's so much fucking chaos. Everybody's running around and they're burning, and the best thing to start dissolving chaos is for me to not be chaotic. And then hopefully if the next person's not chaotic, and then the next. But that was one path.
Yeah.
The other path that this world calls for, and that is a strict contrary to the monk, is that there needs to be people that are running throughout that boat, bringing people to the life ship, that aren't going to naturally be there by themselves. And if that ends in a world where me and the face of the Rethink Tank actually doesn't get to be on the lifeboat, I rest at ease knowing that I got three folks on there.
Here's the thing, man. The journey of getting people on the lifeboat is harder. Than being on. So the reason why that question is great is because it's technically easier to be holy in an environment that's isolated from unholy. So being in a monastery, it's very
The balance of good and
it's
evil
very
again.
it's easier to be close to God in an environment that's next to God. But to be close to God or be good in an environment that's not isolated of just good is a lot harder. So it's harder to be a good man in society than it is to be a monk in a monastery. And it's not to talk bad about, because monks dedicate their lives, and only the maker will really understand what brought them there. Because I, as a person, man, I've had the thought myself, like it is a respectable fee. But then also, and like even in priesthood, like in Orthodox priesthood, they encourage people having families. Having a family is a very hard route. And to be a community leader in religion while having a family is more of a reflection of your conjugation members than it is you as this isolated holy man. So the point I'm trying to make is that in a scenario where you're talking about being saved, I don't think the monk is necessarily saved, and to label him as saved would be the wrong thing to do. We don't know the definition of saved. That's going to be between us and whatever fate we have. But basically asking these questions and trying in the environment we have to be good weighs more than anything else, right? Like there's even that there's a quote about Christ in, not the quote, but the story about Christ in the Bible where it says, the single lost sheep is worth more than the herd, right? The herd can take care of itself. That single one that's on its own is worth more than it, right? So when you kind of like bring that all as a whole, there is like kind of like a teeter-totter you have to have, and like kind of like a trust that you don't have all the right answers and that person doesn't have figured out more. Because when we get, like, for example, not to rant on this, but when Christ was even put on the cross, the holiest of holy are the people who put him there, the guys who were the bishops, the leaders of the church. And I mean, not to go into the details, religion, some would believe he was prophesized for, right? That's how I believe it. Some others don't. But regardless, the people who were closest in that situation didn't open their arms up to it. And you can't really trust what's labeled. You're in the judicial system. Do you think the most righteous people are in positions of judges and lawyers? No, not the case. Sometimes the most righteous people avoid those places because they're not an environment for it. So the point I'm trying to make is in all the shuffle and how hard life is, the person trying to do good and how hard life is that much farther than anybody who's trying to avoid the struggle, right? And when you're sitting there helping 3 people on the life raft and losing yourself in the process, you are a legend and a legacy and a living spectacle in memory. Everybody else will fade in history. The people who get those save others and who create life for other life, those are legends. Those are greats. Those are the people who stand the test of time. And that's always the case, man. You know what I'm saying?
You're so right.
Those who've done more for others.
So that is a perfect transition into concluding with the theme question of the day, which has been, is true strength defined by one's ability to hold themselves accountable, or is accountability an outcome of strength? Now, through this whole investigation, which do you think precedes the other?
I think it's the first. It's the result of holding yourself accountable, and to the level of who you do it for is the level of strength that you have, what you can endure, you know. That's my opinion. Is my opinion right? Or is it some blend? But like I thought you brought out some really good points, and it's a very hard exercise because you constantly have to ask yourself, if I was in the situation, could I have the same strength to own up to the bell? When the bell dings, am I ready to fight? You know? And most of us really can label ourselves fighters, right? We all think we're fighters, and then are we ready to fight when it shows up to us? And I believe the beauty of life is if you're asking for it, the fight will come.
Right.
are you ready to put up your fists? You could avoid it your whole life, but if you're asking for the opportunity, you won't get the result. You'll get the opportunity, and to see what you're made of, it will be there, right?
Yeah, you're so right. And I think the reason why there's so many people that can appreciate the show, What Would You Do, right? So you have this show with John Quinones.
Oh, yeah.
And the question being, what would you do? And they create social stimulating situations where, you know, you witness a kid being kidnapped, or somebody's being racist at the table next to you, or just interesting social situations. And I think it grabs everyone's attention because you're mesmerized by how few people. We watch this scene, and there's a huge audience of millions of people. That audience of millions knows what should morally take place in this scene, right? John Quinones comes out, and in this situation, we're going to have an over-abusive mother that slaps her child for, you know, asking for something at the store.
Yeah, yeah.
And everybody, upon the presentation of the scene, we all know what we should be doing. And why is it such a show and such an entertainment spectacle? Because we're blown away by how many people ignore, remove, or walk past these huge scenes. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road, and what makes a conversation like this so fun but also so fruitful is we can all be the Monday morning quarterback. We can all be that person sitting in our living room saying what we would have done or what they should have done.
Oh, yeah.
But then when we're actually confronted with that, we're mesmerized or shocked by how many of us actually deliver on the standard we hold society to.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've seen exercises of it in the last 4 years, and we can look to some of our neighbors and colleagues and be like, hey, without talking about a specific point, but
Right.
jab or not jab, did you do certain things, did you not? I'm not saying one is wrong or the other, but why you did it is the biggest question. If you did it for health reasons, okay. If you did it because everybody else did it, that's a question you got to ask yourself. And did you go against what you originally thought? We have exercise around us all the time on this, and we see people around us all the time, and they're, you know, I thought this was really funny, like settlers, the concept of settlers. So they went west for gold. They settled along the way, right? Are you a settler? Are you like that shark going after? Do you have your end destination? And like some people, and sometimes you got to be like, my dad was a settler. My grandpa was a settler. I'm a bloodline. I know nothing but settling. I personally know nothing but going for it. You know what I'm saying? And the people I want around me, the people I hold close to me as friends, the language we speak is going after it and trying the most you can at it. And honestly, like, the only time I can judge somebody close to me is when they're not really holding true to themselves or giving it full effort or second guessing themselves. The only person you're doing yourself dirty on that. And if you don't have friends on that same vibe, you're losing, right? So anyways, I love these conversations because there's a constant search for being a better version of yourself. Sometimes this conversation, there might be somebody who tuned out during this podcast. Maybe you weren't that interesting, or maybe it's a question they couldn't answer for themselves, or they have a hard time assuming that all accountability could end up in their own hands in some situations. But anyways, I mean, it's thought-provoking, and you'll always have that kind of line of nature versus nurture and what you kind of subscribe to as well, right?
I agree. That was thorough. So I think boiling it down, we can both agree that it is true that strength is defined by one's ability to hold themselves accountable. I think we are forever losing that in today's modern society because accountability is just a character trait we do not encourage, and it's not really found. I mean, everybody gets a participation trophy. Everybody gets to live their own truth, and we create these safe spaces so people don't have to be confronted with the difficulty and adversity of accountability.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you giving me your time. We've answered the question. We've dissected a lot. Fuck Halloween and have independent strength. I think that's the takeaway from all of this.
And I mean, for me, I think like your podcast is an example of this question of examples of how people can kind of like stick to something, have a gut trust in themselves, and then find people they can communally support them and hold them accountable. And I'm thankful for the time, because every single time I've been here, it's been a challenge, because being in front of a camera is very difficult. Speaking your thoughts concisely is difficult. You've got it down like the back of your hand. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to exercise the muscle, and then also just you've made me look at the question differently too. So appreciate you, brother. And then hopefully this isn't the last one, man. I think these type of dialogues are welcome in the world, and I do think to just kind of cut through the bullshit, you can be better than you think you can be, and you are better than you think you can be, and that's that. Look in the mirror. Do a deep stare and really ask yourself, am I doing what I want? And if I'm not doing what I want, and am I doing it for people I love? Because it's okay to sacrifice for others. But if you're sacrificing for nothing, that's settling, and that's where you're a lost character, you know?
Oh, I love that. That's a perfect cherry to the conversation.
Yeah, good.
So, guys, if we made you laugh, if we made you think, the best thing you can do to support the show is share this episode. So be sure to take that link and spread it out. You know, we're up against an uphill battle with these conglomerates and everything else. So the best thing you could do is take that link and spread it around. Otherwise, hit the like button and finagle the notification bell so you don't miss another. But we go live on Tuesdays at 7 p.m., Sundays at 11 a.m. and noon with all these different shows. You can find it in one central place, and that's at our website at www.rethinktankpodcast.com. So be sure not to miss it. But otherwise, guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
See you guys.